Beautiful. So let's get started. First, I want to just invite everyone to make yourselves comfortable. And whatever that looks like for you tonight, if you'd like to recline, you can recline. If you want to lie down, you're allowed to lie down. You can stand up or you can sit any way that you like. Or you can turn your screen off and do a walking meditation and walk around, whatever works for you. And if you want to join us with your screen on so you can see everyone's face and have your face visible, you can do that. And also no pressure to do that. You can turn your screen off and have more privacy if that helps you relax and be more at ease. I'm going to begin with a little talk as usual. And as I talk, I invite you to uh, make this somewhat of a meditation. So you can listen to the words that I'm saying and also stay present with yourself and stay in your breath or stay in your body. Just stay with whatever meditative practice you like. And I'm going to do the best to do the same. I'll try to have some words and thoughts that I share, but also try to just stay in a meditative practice myself while I'm talking. I'd like to begin a discussion and a practice centered around what the Buddha called the five hindrances. So, this is part of the fourth and final foundation of mindfulness called mindfulness of the Dhammas. So, the Pali word Dhamma, or most commonly heard in Sanskrit, is Dharma. So, it has a lot of different meanings depending on the context. And sometimes it is a word that is used to mean truth. And sometimes it's referring to law or like a universal law. And sometimes it refers to the teachings of the Buddha as a whole or the path that one might follow in the Buddhist teachings. So there's lots of different meanings. And sometimes we use the word Dhamma or Dharma to refer to specific experiences in the mind. And in that case, each mental and physical experience or emotional experience is referred to as a Dhamma. So in the context of the fourth foundation of mindfulness, we're investigating and trying to understand the many facets of our consciousness, of the mind. The Buddha did a wonderful job organizing our experiences into different categories to make teaching easier and to help us more easily identify what's happening inside of us when we're in our human experience, and ideally to try to identify it as it happens. So he talks about the five hindrances to mindfulness. And he talks about other things, the five aggregates of clinging, the seven factors of awakening, the Four Noble Truths, the Noble Eightfold Path. And these are all aspects of this bigger umbrella mindfulness of the Dhammas. But we're going to focus, or we're going to begin focusing on the five hindrances and kind of explore that together for a little while, I hope. So all these lists and categories are not intended merely for an intellectual discussion, but they're really guidelines for helping us to understand the nature of our human mind and our own personal minds. And the value of understanding the five hindrances, it is really about learning to discern skillful and unskillful actions, to discern wise and unwise action and wise and unwise speech. So the five hindrances, what are they? So we have desire, aversion, sloth and torpor, that's kind of one together, sloth and torpor, restlessness, and doubt. Desire, aversion, sloth, torpor, restlessness, and doubt. And I'd like to talk about each one over time. But today we'll focus a little bit more on desire. And I might kind of each talk for the next five talks talk about each one in more detail. Um, but the cool thing is the practice is the same. It's the same process that we use to work with it. But it does sometimes help to really focus on one and really explore how we relate to that. A few years ago, I was on a meditation retreat at Spirit Rock, and one of the teachers is Tueri Salah. And Tueri is one of my favorite teachers. She's just wonderful. And she gave a talk about the five hindrances that really changed my perspective about all this. So I wanted to share some of her ideas, and I want to share some of Joseph Goldstein's ideas about it. And yeah, we'll go from there, and then we'll do a little practice together. I recently listened back to this Dharma talk from Tueri. I found it online. Um, did you know that every Dharma talk at Spirit Rock is recorded? And I'm pretty sure that's true for talks at IMS also. And anyone can listen to any Dharma talk for thousands. They have thousands of different talks, and you can search for different topics and different teachers. It's a pretty amazing resource, and it's all free. It's on dharmaseed.org. So if you're ever curious to explore like a topic of meditation or Buddhism, there's so many wonderful teachers and so many great talks. So anyway, um, I re-listened to Tueri's talk recently, and that's kind of part of what inspired me to talk about this today. So she talks about a concept in Tibetan Buddhism where they're talking about emotions. Um, and they say emotions are self-liberating. So whatever arises in our emotions or our thoughts, they all change and they pass without our effort and without our doing. And so we all have a tendency to feel sad, and then we do whatever it takes to not be sad anymore. Or we feel anxiety and we try to not feel anxious because it's uncomfortable, or grief or anger or whatever it is. It's such a natural pattern to try to make it change, right? And some of us take medications, and that helps us regulate our emotions. It helps regulate our biochemistry, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's a place for that for everything, really. And some people take herbs. They like herbs better. They think it's better for them, or supplements. But it's really all the same process. We're using chemicals or natural or pharmaceutical chemicals, and we're trying to affect our neurochemistry and our biology. And again, that's great. And sometimes we really need that. Um, and sometimes we can become really skillful at doing it without um, pharmaceuticals or without herbs. And we can really fine tune our diet and get really obsessive about our diet, or we can get really into our exercise regimes or our yoga practice or mantra or affirmations. Um, and there's lots of different spiritual practices that can kind of excel at this, really. And in a way, it helps us to escape our human condition. And if we're not careful, our spiritual practices can do this for us. It's like helping us to escape. And there's no wrongness there. Ultimately, we all want to be free. So that's like our ultimate, intention in finding a spiritual practice is to be free of suffering. So, um, I'm not trying to say there's anything wrong with that. And what's beautiful about mindfulness practice is we actually have the opportunity to really be present with our human condition. And in that presence and in that awareness, we find a deeper sense of freedom. And don't get me wrong, plenty of people, and we might at times use practices, even mindfulness practices, to escape. And that's entirely possible. But ideally, our mindfulness practices brings us more intimacy with our human experience and more intimately in contact with what it's like to be human. And to really boil it down, all we have to do is pay attention. just to notice what's going on. When we're having emotions or experiencing some aspect of these hindrances, it turns out we don't have to do anything. They liberate themselves. They're self-liberating because they change. And they do that without any effort. And this is the nature of impermanence. This is what the Buddha wanted us all to understand, maybe above all other things, that everything changes. Nothing is permanent. The more we cultivate mindfulness, the more easily we can see this and begin to have less resistance to whatever is happening in our lives or inside of us. And so our experiences can become self-liberating. They liberate themselves. Or another interpretation is they liberate us from ourselves, from our self-identified small self. Ian McCrory says that Dhamma is not a way out of our problems, but a way into them. In our problems, we realize the futility of thinking. In our problems, we experience the pain of the human condition. And in our problems, we see the cause of our misery. And in our problems, we see that we are the cause. The Dhamma takes us into this morass and through it. The Dhamma is more of a bridge than a detour. I really like that phrase. The Dhamma is more of a bridge than a detour. And then he also tells a story. He says, one monk said to his companion, "It is so good to walk alone." Replied his companion, "Precisely, it is so good to be with you." And so Tueri was reflecting on this passage, and she says, "This is the Dhamma. We are total aloneness and total intimacy. And when I walk by myself, everyone is with me. And when everyone is walking with me, I am alone." That's such a beautiful summary that she offered about that. So these practices that we often have within ourselves, we have to do by ourselves, and no one can do it for us. And in a way, it really helps to know that everyone else is also suffering in the same ways. We're all in this together. None of us are immune to this human condition. And even all of our favorite teachers are practicing with these hindrances all the time. And in my opinion, the best teachers are the ones that will admit that. I'm very wary of the teachers who claim to be beyond these fundamental human experiences. And maybe they have moments where they're or periods of their lives where they're more free from the hindrances, and maybe we all have these moments. But as soon as we let our guard down and stop paying attention, they come creeping right back in. It's just kind of the nature of our human experience. So it can be helpful to break it down a little and to focus on one aspect at a time or one hindrance at a time. So this is what I propose we do. So desire. Desire is the fun and exciting word for it. Maybe a catchier email to get people interested, but another way to say it is wanting, or the wanting mind. Suzuki Roshi called it wanting mind. And then another word that's less fun is greed. But it's the same fundamental part of ourselves. And you might use the word longing or wishing or craving or even just liking. Sometimes just like liking is a kind of a subtle form of desire or greed, even. The Buddha described desire as a pool of clear water that has been suffused with colored dye. A pool with clear water that has been suffused with colored dye. When we see our reflection, everything is colored by the dye. He has a really lovely water analogy for each of the five hindrances, and I'll save them for the next talk. So to leave you curious. Um, so when there's this colored dye in our reflection, it's sometimes really difficult to notice that we're in it because the whole world is colored in that way. So, we can begin to ask ourselves, is there desire or is there wanting or even is there liking? And it's not that these qualities are bad or we shouldn't have them. We do have them. And our goal is really to be in right relationship with them. So we need to be careful not to judge or blame or to try to change ourselves. If we're trying to fix them or stop having them, because we're not supposed to have the hindrances. We have some kind of idea that they're bad. That itself is desire, or you can say it's aversion because it's basically the other side of the coin. We're trying to avoid having this experience. So then, as soon as we notice ourselves having that aversion to desire, well, I'm having desire that's not good, then we can notice, well, what is not wanting like? What is it like to not wanting it to go away? And then we can become present with that experience of not wanting. And the more we pay attention, the more we begin to notice that we may have certain patterns or tendencies, and maybe different times of our lives or different phases, we might be really prone to desire, or we might be really prone to aversion, or one of the other hindrances. So the good news is, as usual, the Buddha had some really practical suggestions about how to practice with this stuff. Um, so if we're working with desire, the first step one is recognize that desire is present. Recognize when it's present. So it sounds very simple. So we experienced desire or wanting in many ways. And of course, sensual and sexual desire is the big one in this category that kind of seems really obvious. And these experiences are so biological, they're so basic to our human experience. And because they're so in our face, they can be the most easy to recognize. And at the same time, they can be really sneaky and covert. And, we're having this desire that's coloring our whole world. The whole world becomes tinted with desire, like the color dye in the water. So surprisingly, sometimes we don't realize that we're having it. We're kind of in this experience and it's subconscious. But it can show up in a lot of other ways other than sensual and sexual desire. So, wanting material possessions, wanting a different job, or wanting a different income. And one of the clues that might help us, notice that we're having this experience is, I mean, there's lots of different words that you can use, but the one that works for me is if only. If only I had more money, I'd be less stressed out. If only I didn't have to work so much, I'd be less stressed out. That kind of idea. If only I had a different partner or a different relationship. If only I was truly met in my partnership, I'd be happy. If only my husband listened to me. If only my wife was respected me. So it's wanting someone else to behave differently. If only whatever, then I wouldn't be angry all the time. If only the world leaders wouldn't be so inclined towards violence and corruption, then we could have world peace. And there's nothing wrong with those thoughts. They're all, pretty reasonable expectations, right? If only the air wasn't so filled with smoke every summer and there wasn't such a threat of wildfires here on the West Coast, then I could relax, in July and August in Ashland. Um, so, there's always a if only this. So that's an aspect of desire that can be a little bit more sneaky. And another one happens in meditation all the time. If only I wasn't so uncomfortable. If only I wasn't in so much pain, I'd be able to be present and relax, right? soon as this meditation's over and as soon as that bell rings, then I'll be able to really be comfortable and relax. Um, if only I could get up and stretch my body, you know. If only this teacher would stop talking, then I'd be able to resume my quest for enlightenment, right? So it's not just desire with a capital D or desire with a capital or wanting with a capital W. It's like anytime I'm wishing my reality was different. And it doesn't have to be like the big sexy desire. It's just like wishing my reality was different. So this is the first step is to recognize that it's happening. Oh, there I am. I'm caught in this wishing that my life was different right now or my reality was different. And let's not underestimate how difficult this can be at times to catch yourselves doing it. It's really easy to do. We all just do it naturally. It's not as easy to notice that we're doing it. All right, so that's step one. Step two is have a sip of tea. All right, step two, notice when desire is absent. Oh, good. Everyone's doing step two. Great. Um, so there are times when we're not in a state of desire and we're not wanting anything to be different. And maybe it just happens. Sometimes we just fall into these moments. And sometimes it's the fruit of lots of practice. Who knows? But if desire is not present, this is what the Buddha says. If sensual desire is not present, one knows there is no sensual desire in me. And this is essentially what the Buddha called the luminous mind. This is freedom from desire, which can bring further concentration and insight and peace and happiness. And this states like this can come and go, but when they come, it's really helpful to notice that they're there. And it's not just a mental note, oh, desire is absent. It's the total presence with that experience. Can I really just be here for that experience? What is it like? How is it to be free from desire in this particular moment? How is it for me to feel content in this moment? And it really helps to pause and explore and honor these moments where we feel content. And that pausing and honoring and curiosity in that experience, it helps to strengthen the experience and it helps to make it actually more accessible. So, step three is know what conditions underlie the presence or absence of desire. Know what conditions underlie the presence or absence of desire. So, this is a really interesting exploration. So, while there are countless phenomena that may inspire desire, on a basic level, when we're not mindful, any sense object or pleasant sensation leads to our habitual response of or conditioning of craving. So anytime we have a sense object that's pleasant, our habitual response is to crave. So we might smell a delicious smell. We're walking by a restaurant and there's delicious smells coming from this restaurant, and we begin craving essentially delightful meal. Oh, that smells good. Let's eat there. Or we might see a person who we're attracted to, and we might have some sensual or sexual feelings that arise in us. So this is a biological response. And if we're not mindful of it, we can become lost in that fantasy of, wanting this person or wanting this food, wanting this experience that we think is going to be really delightful. So just to be clear, it's normal. It's normal to crave food. It's normal to have sexual feelings. It's part of our conditioning. It's built into our biology. this is how humans have survived for millions of years and how our population has flourished to the on this planet to the tune of 8.5 billion people is because of this, biology. And so we're animals. We're, these are some of our animal instincts, and it's part of what makes us human. And so on some level, I think it's important to honor that. This is our nature, and there's no reason to shame ourselves and make ourselves wrong for having these natural desires. And there's a way that we can bow to these parts of ourselves without shame and without blame, and also without indulging them and obeying them. Um, so that's really where our mindfulness practice serves us, is when we can notice having the experience. And then there's a possibility of wise action. The Buddha said, he was talking to his students, he says, bhikkhus, whatever a bhikkhu frequently thinks and ponders upon, that will become the inclination of the mind. If one thinks and ponders upon thoughts of sensual desire, then the mind inclines towards thoughts of sensual desire. So the Buddha figured it out 2,600 years ago. And now we know this to be true in our understanding of neuroplasticity. So in neuroscience, we have an expression, neurons that fire together, wire together. So the more repetitive thoughts we have of a certain nature, the more inclined we're going to have the same type of repetitive thoughts. And the stronger those neural connections become, and the more likely we are to have the same thoughts and feelings, the more those neural connection pathways activate, and then the stronger the neural connections become, and then the more we'll have those thoughts and feelings, and it's just this cycle. So in being mindful, noticing our feelings of desire or any feeling, it kind of interrupts that conditioned pathway, and we can begin to forge new pathways that we choose to have, that are more conducive to our equanimity, maybe, and maybe more conducive to our peace and our happiness. So to be clear, there's nothing wrong with enjoying a pleasant feeling. So this is one of the difficulties that I had when I was a young practitioner. I used to kind of have some kind of pleasantness come up, and then I would push against it because I thought I wasn't supposed to have pleasant feelings, or I wasn't supposed to enjoy it. And I don't think that's the intention. Also, I'm not a monk. I haven't renounced all sensual, worldly experiences. I enjoy sex and food and music and nature, and I enjoy connecting with people and all the pleasurable experiences that, it's like that we can enjoy being human. Um, and the problem is when we think unconsciously that if we acquire more pleasant experiences, it'll bring us more happiness. It will not. And so all the sensual experiences, they end and they change. And all that happiness that comes from experiencing pleasure is fleeting. And it's really tempting to think, well, if I always get my way in life, and this is like, I don't think anybody thinks this consciously, but this is kind of the underlying thought process. If I always get my way in life, I can just stack one pleasant experience after the next, and then I'll remain in this constant pleasure, and then I'll be happy. And again, this is like just what we do. This is our mind's nature to always seek and desire the next pleasant experience or more comfort or whatever. But this ideology, it falls apart pretty quickly as soon as we realize, hopefully, that we never always get our way. So, you know, um, we find out pretty soon that, the how fleeting it is when we rely on these, external sensory experiences. The good news is that, again, bringing mindfulness to our experience and noticing that desiring of sensual experiences, um, it wakes us up to the fact that our true happiness is not dependent on our sensual pleasure. All right, so step three is notice what conditions are present. So, like I said, notice when there's a smell or when there's an attractive person. Those are the conditions that are present. And there's lots of conditions. Step four is noticing what conditions underlie the removal of desire. So we've established that desire is inevitable. And what do we do once we notice it arise? Um, well, that's actually it. Um, we don't do anything. We don't have to try to stop it because we can't. We don't have to repress it or push it away or change it because we can't. We just have to notice it. It's self-liberating. It will liberate itself. And all we have to do is notice it and be present and pay attention. The expression that the Buddha used in his journey towards enlightenment was, Mara, I see you. Mara is um, the deity that's the embodiment of a sensual desire. So as soon as we notice the sensual desire that's there, um, we could say, Mara, I see you. And you don't have to use those words. I don't use those words, but that's the idea, just noticing that it's there. And as soon as we notice it and recognize it, we're immediately given the possibility of not getting lost in it or not identifying with it or indulging it or obeying it. So we just notice it and say, Hi, I see you. And the more practice we have at doing that, of saying, Hi, Mara, I see you, I recognize this, um, the more we see that it's impersonal. And this is the concept that I really like, is like, it's not us. It's not our fault. It's not coming from inside me. It's just a feeling that comes and goes like all other feelings, especially when the right conditions are present. So, under these conditions, this experience will arise. Joseph Goldstein says it's important not to underestimate the power of mindfulness. In other words, just noticing, just being mindful in these moments can really be transformative. And one of my other favorite teachers in a different context, Lawrence Heller, he's a psychotherapist who created the modality that he calls neuroaffective relational model, or NARM is the acronym. So instead of the word mindfulness, he uses the word curiosity. So it's essentially describing the same experience. He says, curiosity is a powerful solvent. So being mindful, being curious about my experience in this present moment, it's a solvent. It just kind of dissolves things and it removes the grip of having to obey our feelings. So we can simply pay attention. We can simply notice and say hi and get curious about our experience. And often this is enough to disentangle us from the grips of desire. Sometimes it's not enough. And when that's not enough to just notice it because we're too caught in it, um, one idea that Joseph Goldstein offers is the wise reflection to say regarding our our intention, our basic intention for practice. Is my intention to be lost in desire or is it to be free? And maybe reminding ourselves of our intention for practice can just help us drop it. And sometimes that's enough to just help us snap out of it. And occasionally it's not enough, and our biological forces are too intense, too immense, right? And our animal instincts are too strong and they really take over. I remember I began studying Buddhism when I got to college. I was 17. It was my first year of college, and I began meditating and reading different Buddhist texts. And I remember being like this Buddhism is pretty awesome, but ridding oneself of desire, that's never going to happen for me. I mean, I was a teenage boy, it's not, and then as a young man in my 20s, forget it. It's just like I couldn't, the chemicals were too strong, the hormones. I wasn't even going to pretend to that part of to understand that part of the practice. And I was like, yeah, I'll do Buddhism, but except for that, I'm not going to even touch that. Um, and it's kind of like, when you're working with addiction, like, if there's a chemical addiction, um, whether it's your, addiction to nicotine or alcohol or opioids or benzodiazepines or, heroin, it doesn't matter. If there's a chemical addiction, being mindful of that, is not enough. It's such a strong force. And it's the same with our hormones sometimes, um, you know, because there are chemicals inside our bodies that are telling us what to do. Um, so now that I'm an old man, it's a little bit easier. it's, um, it's more manageable, and I get caught sometimes, of course, but it's a remote possibility to work with it. And obviously, that's kind of referring to just the sexual or sensual desire piece, because that was a big obstacle for me as a young man. But desire goes, as we've already said, it goes far beyond that. So whether it's other desires might not naturally decline as we age. We can be old and still have these desires for more money or more power, obviously. Or if I, have this car or this house or this um, more money, I'll be happy. Or if only this political party would be in power, or this law, maybe I'd have happiness, right? So working with all the different expressions, it only becomes easier with more practice. Okay, so step 5. The final instruction is about avoiding future arisings of desire. So, um, how do I know how to avoid desire in the future? So, knowing the patterns and pathways, knowing my tendencies, we can start to take preventative measures and practice making wise choices that will help us get too entangled. For example, for those of us who have a tendency to get wrapped in sexual desire, it's recommended to focus on the unattractive aspects of the body. So you think about pooping and peeing, you think about body fluids, unless you're into that kind of stuff. And then don't think about that. Think about other stuff. Think about like whatever it is that doesn't turn you on, right? Aging or disease and decay. Um, so that's kind of the idea that you kind of just shift your attention to, the parts that are less of a turn on for you, whatever that looks like for you. But also, avoiding certain foods can be really helpful. Avoid garlic or onions or chocolate or intoxicants. There's all kinds of things that people do to help kind of settle that natural instinct or anything that might be used as an aphrodisiac. But again, um, if your pattern is not about sex and it's about money, then maybe there's other choices you make to help avoid the future temptations. So you want to set the conditions right so you're not caught. Because if the conditions are there, it will come up. So maybe you spend less time with your super rich friends. Maybe you spend more time with friends that are, in your same socioeconomic level. Or maybe you don't read the magazine that, you like that has all the things in it that make you want more things. um, or maybe you don't go on social media, or whatever it is, whatever the conditions are for you, um, that kind of feed it. You notice what the conditions are, and then you make wiser choices. So again, there's a certain selfless nature of this phenomenon, and meaning it's not personal. So anything can arise in any of us if the right conditions are in place. Um, so rather than getting upset about it or shaming or blaming ourselves, we can look at the conditions present and begin to restructure the conditions in our lives. And we can ask ourselves, how might I create conditions that are more fruitful and more supportive to the qualities of consciousness that I want to create? All right. I didn't expect to talk that long. I just got carried away a little bit. I propose that I stop talking mostly and we can just do a little practice. So, again, I invite you to settle in whatever way that feels right for you. You can sit up straight or you can lie down, stand up, whatever works for you. How would it be to let some of these words go? Just be here. How is it to be present in my experience right now? I may notice physical sensations. What is it like to have this body? What is my body doing right now? I might notice my breathing. Is it possible to notice my physical sensations? Notice my body and notice my breath, and just be okay with how it is right now without desiring anything to be different. And if there is a desire or wish that my experience was different, can I notice that? Can I notice my wishing for something different and not wish that to be different? Okay, there's my wishing. There it is. Can I be with that? This too is welcome. And then something else comes up in my awareness, and a new tension or pain, a new thought. And can I be with that? Can I really be with that without wishing it to be different? And if the answer is yes, if I can be with this without wanting or desire for anything else, what is that like? How is it to be content? Can I extend my curiosity to my contentness in this simple moment? As my experience changes, can I stay present with the changes? Can I be with this? And if I feel that I can't be with this, can I be with that feeling of can't be with this? Put that into this too is welcome. And if I get distracted by a thought or a feeling or a wish, I come back. I just come back into this present experience of my humanness and notice my humanness. What is it like to sit and know that I'm sitting? My invitation is to start to wiggle your fingers or your feet, wiggle your toes. You might bring a little movement to your spine if you wish. Give yourself a stretch. If you want to stay still and silent, then you can stay still and silent. Or you might choose to open your eyes now in accordance with what feels right for you. I'd like to save a little time for comments or questions. Um, any questions or comments or any wisdom to share? Yeah, please.
Hello. Thank you for
Hi.
that. That was lovely. Um, okay, so everything seemed really like I was on board with. The thing I got kind of lost with was step five. Step five seems like it's just the second hindrance,
Yeah,
that we're using the second hindrance to deal with the first hindrance, which makes it seem like, are we going to then use the third one to do the second and the fourth? Like we're just going to be running through them to not get stuck on one.
totally. Yeah, that's a great observation. I had the same question, and actually, I asked Tueri that during a retreat a few times ago because she told me, she said a similar thing to me. She said, notice the conditions because I was having this incredible deep experience and I was having this contentment and there was this moment of freedom, right? And she said, notice the conditions. Um, and I got a little tripped up because I'm like, well, then if I get attached to the conditions, isn't that like a wanting or craving or a version of whatever's not the condition for that, right? Um, so that's a great question. And I think there's a little paradox there because there are conditions that are required to, cultivate certain qualities of consciousness. And so there's conditions that are considered wise, and that's kind of the nature of it. And it's not that we can't become enlightened, at any moment doing whatever. People it happens sometimes where people are, you know, you know, sleeping on a park bench and they wake up, or they're like eating a popsicle and they wake up, whatever it is. But most of the time, it's not like that. Most of the time, like, um, we need to nurture certain conditions, not in a way that we're like attached and fixated on them, but we're honoring the fact that this helps, this helps cultivate certain qualities of the mind that I'm looking for. And it's not because I'm seeking pleasure, it's because I'm seeking freedom, like real freedom, this state where I'm not dependent on all the external um, conditions and realities in order to be peaceful and happy and equanimous and generous and kind. Yeah, it's a great question. Does that kind of make sense?
I think so. I'm wondering if like desire is on one end of the spectrum, and so aversion is on the other. And by noticing it, then you find that like middle spot. Is that kind of sort of in line with the concept?
Well, definitely, yeah, desire and aversion are like two sides of the same coin. Because if we're desiring something, it's we're having an aversion to the opposite or the lack of, right? So that's yeah, something I think we'll talk explore a little bit more next time. But I think, for all the practices with any of the hindrances, it's about noticing when it's present, and not pushing it away, noticing when it's not present and not clinging to that.
Okay, like the satisfaction of noticing. There's not like a doing on
There's
either
no
side.
doing. Yeah, that's ideal, is we're not doing anything
Okay.
except for establishing a quality of paying attention or a quality of awareness,
Okay. Okay. Then I
which
will
is
just
also
settle
not
on
doing. Even that's not doing. It's because that awareness is there all the time, whether we notice it or not.
that.
But I
Okay.
think
Thank you.
the best way that I've heard it described is non-doing. Um, and then even when you catch yourself starting to do or make or force, then okay, notice that, and then do. It's just all these layers on top of layers of non-doing and noticing.
Okay. So like the noticing instead of doing.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then, the other aspect with all these practices is like, um, it's very easily to get intellectually stuck, because the ideas don't always make sense. So we can get a little tripped up, and famously, Zen Buddhism and really Buddhism as a whole, and other religions too, and other spiritual practices, there's this paradox that's like built into it, and you can, with your mind, you can get really stuck. And the Buddha was really practical, and all my favorite teachers say the same thing. It's like try it. See how it works for you. Try this idea of creating conditions or noticing conditions, and then see what it does for you. And if it works, then, keep doing it.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah. I love the question. Thank you. Any other thoughts? I realize we're pretty much at time, so I'm happy to stay a little bit longer, but if you need to hop off, I understand that too. So give yourself permission to. Thank you, Annie. I want to address just one. I think it's quick. Um, Sometimes people like to send me questions by email, and that's always a fun thing to do too. So if you have any questions, you can always do that. And it's funner for me. It's more enjoyable to talk about rather than writing an email because, yeah, that's just a lot sometimes. So if you think of a question, feel free to send it to me and we can maybe talk about it in one of the future classes. So one of these questions was perfectly timed. And the question is, are craving, aversion, delusion in the mind? And I'm going to paraphrase a little bit, or I'm going to kind of consolidate it. One of the things that apparently I said is it's all mind. So what is that? Where is the mind coming from? I think that's the gist of the question. It's like, what is the mind? Um, and the short answer is I don't know. So I wish I could just leave it at that. Um, and a lot of Buddhist teachers talk about the mind in a way that's very, it's really impersonal. So it's not us, it's not coming from us. There's an expression that thought is to the mind as a sound is to the ear. So it's as if it's coming from outside of us. And there's these experiences that just arise or they move through us. So it's very different from this idea of the mind being like in our brain, the brain being the center of the mind. And there's lots of interesting thoughts about, in science about what is the mind. And there's a one theory that it trickles down, it begins in the brain, and then it goes down to the body, and then there's the trickle up philosophy where it actually begins in our cells in our body, and then it trickles up to the brain. And then other people say, no, neither of those are correct. It's actually simultaneous. And Candace Pert, she was on the team of people that discovered peptides. She discovered the first neuropeptide, and she says it's not psychology or cardiology. It's psycho, pneumo, cardio, gastro, immunology. It's all this simultaneous process that involves all of our body systems. And um, recently, this is just kind of totally geeky and interesting to me, but I recently read a meta-analysis that was looking at what the authors of the study called a spiritually transformative experience. And they were looking at, so they had this criteria for what is a spiritually transformative experience. And there was these different categories and different experiences that allowed them to label it as a spiritually transformative experience. And so there's three categories. One was meditation. So these deep Olympic meditators who had these spiritually transforming experiences. And the second category was people using psilocybin. And then there's a third category, which was people who died and near-death experiences where they actually died. Um, and so the interesting thing is the people who are meditating and the psilocybin experiences, they had really similar brainwave patterns, and certain parts of their brain actually turned off, not on. So it was down regulating the aspects of our brain that give us a sense of self and separateness. And so if we quiet these parts of our brain through meditation or psilocybin or any number of things, um, we lose our kind of conditioned experience of being separate, and we feel more connected and more one with everything, all the things that people describe in their spiritual experiences. I mean, I can talk about what parts of the brain, those are, but it's kind of like getting into the weeds a little bit. So then, you might say that those parts of the brain are involved with self or no self. Um, However, the people who had a near death experience, they were off. Their hard drive was turned off or restarted, rebooted. It was not on during that time. Um, no brain activity. And they reported similar spiritually transformative experiences. And so the authors who are scientists, they're like, so this leads us to believe that there's a lot that we don't know. It's basically like, we don't know. This is consciousness, and we think that it has to do with the body and the brain and the nervous system until it doesn't. And then it's like, well, I don't know. What is the mind anyway? So that kind of brings us full circle to our conversation last month in our practice together of this uncertainty of needing to know. And really, it's just a mystery. And if we can remain in that mystery and unknowing, then I don't know, allows for more curiosity. All right. Lovely to see you all. Thank you for being here and practicing together. I think I keep saying this, but next time I'd like to do a little bit longer practice and a little bit less talking, but we'll see how it actually goes. I hope you all have a wonderful evening.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.